over to you. Okay, all yours.
Okay, great. I need to share my screen and
let me do that, Jim. I'm just going to give you hosting rights. So you are now the host and you should be able to share.
All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. And I'm really excited to be able to be here with you today. My name is Jim Martin, formal name James Martin, and I am not an expert in psychological safety. It's just something that I have recently been interested in. And so I've done a little bit of study of it. It's something that originated in the business world, has been researched in the medical field, but hasn't picked up a whole lot of traction in education yet. So I'm hoping that we'll see a lot more of it in education in the coming years. I have been in education for 23 years. I've been a teacher, a principal, an assistant principal, a supervisor of principals at a variety of different levels, and now an instructional coach, and really enjoying that role that I'm playing right now. So thank you again for having me and for joining me, and I'm really excited to talk about this, and feel free to share anything. And Fred, I hope if there are chats, I can't see the chat, and so
I'll monitor for you.
Okay, thanks.
You got it.
The norms are, I think Fred mentioned these, but just assuming the best of all participants. No one is the expert. Please participate as you feel comfortable. Mute yourself when you're not speaking, and again, your video is welcome, and hopefully you have a fun session. Hopefully this is a good experience for you. My learning targets for today, I want to be able to define psychological safety by the time we're done, to identify examples and non-examples of psychological safety, and to consider how we might employ psychological safety to improve educational services post-pandemic. We're all sort of in this place where we're wondering how things are going to look when we come back to school, and so I want to address psychological safety's role in that. So this is a tool that I use when I'm working with students quite a bit, and it's a way to kind of expose them to vocabulary, sort of an advanced organizer of sorts, a self-reflection. So if you wouldn't mind just maybe thinking where you might put your check on this table for psychological safety. Maybe you've never heard of it. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you feel like you can define it. Or maybe you feel like you can define it and use it in an example. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of thinking in your head or on a piece of paper, marking where you might be, and you don't have to share it out. It's just for your own purposes. We'll revisit this a little bit later. Hopefully it will move. Your understanding of psychological safety will move on this scale. We're going to take a little survey. So all you have to do, you have to have a little sheet of paper by you, and you just need to mark 1, 2, 3, 4 for where you fall on this. I'm going to read the statement, and then you can indicate on your piece of paper if you're a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. If it depends, that's a 0. So it's not negative to be, it depends, it's just no points. So we're going to just go through these pretty quickly. If you need me to slow down, then just pop that up in the chat. So, and again, you're not going to have to share this with anybody, so just be as honest as you want to be. The first one is, I feel confident sharing my opinion at work. So 1 would be strongly agree, 2 agree, 3 agree, disagree, 4 strongly disagree. When I share an opinion with my team, I feel listened to. So whatever you conceptualize as your team, maybe a group of people that you work with most closely, it could be a grade level team. When I share an opinion with my administration or my supervisor, I feel listened to. So whatever your particular situation is. Our team has a manageable amount of disagreement. Our school has a manageable amount of disagreement. So again, if you're not in a school, then maybe the larger organization within where you work. There are systems for sharing disagreements during meetings and generally. If I share a disagreement with my team, they sometimes respond defensively. Okay, now this, I'm going to switch it up on you just to keep you on your toes. The scale has flipped here. So strongly disagree is number 1, disagree is 2, agree is 3, and strongly agree is 4. That same reverse scale here, if I share a disagreement with my administration or supervisor, they sometimes respond defensively. I feel nervous about sharing my opinions with my team. Again, strongly disagrees on top, strongly agrees on the bottom. And now we flip that back. So I feel comfortable acknowledging things I don't know and need to learn. 1 is strongly agree, 2 is agree, 3 is disagree, 4 is strongly disagree. I reach out to colleagues and coaches for help in learning new things. I reach out to administration or supervisor, whatever your equivalent of a boss is, for helping in learning new things. I feel comfortable acknowledging at work when I have made a mistake. And mistakes are treated as learning opportunities at my work. Okay, so if you'll total your score, just add them up. And the way that I've created this survey is that the lower your score, the higher your level of psychological safety. So there were 14 questions. So if your score is anywhere between 14 and 35, you're on the lower end of the scale. So psychological safety is a little bit higher in your organization or your team, and the higher the score, the lower the psychological safety. So if you're on anywhere between 36 and 56. This isn't a fixed thing. This is basically just an idea. And if you have zeros, then that could have skewed it. If you have a lot of it depends, those are probably issues that just need to be looked a little bit more closely at. But this just gives you an idea of where you might be in your organization as we move forward. I'm going to show a video, so I hope you'll indulge me, and then we're going to talk about, we actually have 2 videos, 2 visuals, and then we're going to talk about them relative to psychological safety. So this is the first one.
Thank you very much. So I ask Bill a question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting. So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
Okay, so now we'll go on to the next video.
February 16th, 2008. I handed directly to Jessica.
So you don't interrupt. So you had the car for 2 weeks.
I picked up the car.
Put your hand down, or else you're going out. Do you understand?
Yeah.
You knew that he had a suspended license.
Yeah.
And she was completely
Shut-
okay with it.
I didn't ask you a question.
Just drive it back to the apartment and park it until he got his license.
Your Honor, that's not true.
Did you hear me? I said people just don't stand up here.
She was able to drive the car the whole time.
Listen to me. Don't say anything. I don't need any help from you.
Who she was, I've never seen her before in my life.
You
Never
always
talked
go
to her
to,
whatsoever.
now out. Okay, now out. Just a second. Out. Just out. Just out. Thank you very much. There's only one ringmaster here. That's me.
Yeah, and I've never met
Just
her
a
before.
second. She showed up at your door and said,
I opened the door though.
goodbye. It's getting more orderly here by the moment.
Seem to be doing a great job.
License, then you wouldn't have gotten into trouble. So kiss your deposit goodbye.
Not
Put your
true.
hand down. Put
Not true.
your hand. Throw him
She
out.
let him.
Throw him out.
She
Out.
let him
He
drive
goes
it.
out.
She let
He
him
goes
drive it. She
out.
knew he was going
He
to drive
goes
it.
out.
I'm going out, but it's all
Good.
wrong.
He's
sir.
going out.
Before.
Nobody hears you
Go.
except yourself.
She knew he was going to drive
Do
it.
you understand, sir?
Yes, I do.
Perfect.
Step up.
Okay, so a little Judge Judy to start out your Friday, and President Trump. So what do these visuals have to say about psychological safety? I'm curious to hear what you think based upon the survey that we just took. You can throw it up in the chat box, or you're welcome to share.
And feel free to use the chat box, or if you use the, on the participants tab, if you hit the raise hand button, that'll appear on my screen and I'll be able to just call on you so you can unmute.
Thanks, Fred.
So you have a couple pieces coming in, James, so I'll just share them with you. So Michelle shared that, you know, it was a reflective opportunity for her to think about the importance of limiting exposure to people who might be considered toxic, right? For like any number of reasons, right? So just keeping in mind that we have to limit our exposure to people who are toxic. Rachel wrote, you know, in the case of the president, he has a bank of psychological safety based on how he shares ideas in kind of like an unabashed way, right? He's just kind of sharing things out there. Tracy wrote, I'm not so sure that either version would be considered healthy.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on that. All right. Well, if anybody else wants to chime in, feel free. I put these two examples together, and certainly am not trying to make any kind of a comment on the quality of Judge Judy or the entertainment value of Judge Judy or on anything political. But here is a particular case. In the case of President Trump, you can see that he's talking about an idea that he has for helping with the coronavirus pandemic, and he's actually turning to some of his experts, but they're not saying anything. And it turns out that some of his suggestions were questioned by medical authorities later, and this is a situation where disagreement, some challenge would have been helpful. Maybe not in this particular forum, but you can see that there is no disagreement. There is no challenge to what he's presenting here, and it caused a little confusion across the country. In the case of Judge Judy, you know, again, it's entertainment and it's fun to watch from a distance, but probably not a great reflection of psychological safety in the sense that people are being kicked out, people are being silenced, people not able to express their thoughts. So I actually used these as two examples, two current cultural examples where psychological safety is not at play.
And Jim, just as you're shifting, Rachel just added as you were chatting, you know, in agreement, you know, in the case of Judge Judy, and likely because of the entertainment value piece, she thrives on diminishing the safety of others, probably to boost her own sense of worth or value or power.
Absolutely, that's a really wonderful point. Thank you. So I define psychological safety by using the acronym FORD. So I put this image of a Ford SUV here to just kind of help you remember. But we can use the acronym of FORD to remember the key components of psychological safety. So it involves failure being normalized in our organizations. So we're not scared of failure. Failure is normal. We're going to make mistakes. And as long as we're learning from those mistakes, then that's a good thing. An openness to learning. So being willing to learn new things and try new things. Risk. We're in a risky profession because we work with human beings. So there's always, going to be the unknown involved in that process. And so we have to be willing to put ourselves out there and try new stuff. And then D is disagreement and challenge. So it is important in a psychologically safe environment for there to be a managed amount of disagreement and challenging of one another. So those are the 4 key components of psychological safety. Again, if you have any questions or comments as we go, please throw those in the chat or raise your hand. So I'm going to talk about a tale of 2 teachers. This is Brian. Brian is a teacher of 9 years. He has been out of school like so many other teachers since the middle of March due to the pandemic. And Brian hasn't had a lot of previous use of technology in his classroom. He's not scared of it, but he just hasn't had an opportunity to use it a whole lot. But since the pandemic, Brian has invested in some project-based learning. He's always wanted to try that, and he has found this a great opportunity to put some of that into place. He has integrated units of study, bringing in math, science, reading, all sorts of things into projects that kids can do at their home that keeps them engaged. And he has found new ways of connecting with his students. He started doing morning meetings virtually. He has really relied upon things like virtual recesses and virtual PE sessions, finding new ways of connecting with the students, sometimes having one-on-one meetings over Zoom or over Google Meets. And then, so this is Brian. We also have here Allison. This is the other teacher. She also has 9 years of experience. She's been out of school since the same time Brian has, since March 23rd. She has not previously used technology. She's in the same boat as Brian. In this particular case, she's relied upon her basal reading program, which she always has used to teach reading. She's just translated that to a virtual setting. She's continued to use her math program, so the worksheets and activities that were part of the math program, she's just transplanted to online. She's had a lot of online meeting worries. She is kind of nervous about holding online sessions. She was kind of scared about all the information that came out about people Zoom bombing, and she was worried about showing people the insides of kids' homes and having that recorded, where that might end up. So she had a lot of fears associated with that. And she asked for principal approval on just about everything that she did during this time to make sure that it was cleared with her principal and make sure that she felt comfortable moving forward. So I'm curious to know now in your chat box or comments, what do these 2 tales have to say about psychological safety? Based on the FORD definition, based on the 2 non-examples that I presented a little bit earlier, based on the survey, what are your thoughts about the way that these 2 teachers have responded to the current situation that we're in? I'll give you a few minutes to think about that, to write about that if you want to comment.
And feel free, if you want to share your thoughts out by speaking, just feel free to raise your hand, and I'll call on you.
Oh, hi. I don't know how to raise my hand if that's okay.
Thanks, Paul.
Hey, I really like what you're presenting here, James. Personally, based on, just to talk about if it's okay, psychological safety, I think it's really important what you're presenting. I see that Rachel's posting about the culture of nice. I actually agree with that statement. Like, it's important that we receive constructive feedback from our, administrators, principals and such. But of course there's a way of presenting that, right, with tact. And I think that, not to get into politics, I think with the political climate being so heightened, whether you're on the left, the right, the middle, there's so many, it's a vast spectrum, right? And people actually understand. I think it's important that we respect it as much as possible, of course, and maybe try to understand it, not necessarily agree, and keep our own values in place, but to understand where that person came from, how he or she, whoever grew up, all these social values that come into play. So I just think that's important. That I agree, like, being nice isn't necessarily always the way to go. It's a matter of being constructively honest and with tact, if that makes any sense. And I think that, I think in education we miss it. I think because I don't even know if you know about the Big Five. I subscribe to the Big Five: personality traits, open agreeableness. And, there's a lot of research that shows that Democrats, for example, tend to be more open agreeableness, where conservatives, not that they aren't, but they're more, systematic, maybe, and have a more rigid approach. Not to say I'm favoring one or the other, but rather, like, that's how we need to, like, understand that as educators when we talk to our students and where they come from and where our administrators come from. I think that all comes into play. And not that it's a right or wrong. It's just, as humans, we're hardwired to be like that, and our social environments make us like that. So,
yeah, thank you, Paul. That's a really good point. That it's important for us to offer constructive feedback to one another, for sure, and to really frame that in a way that it can be received. And if it's hard to hear that in an organization, that may be an organization that needs to work on its psychological safety, because it's really rooted in trust, so that we can be honest with each other.
Absolutely. It depends where you grew up, in the country. I mean, there's different regions, there's so many values, to it, So I think what you're presenting is great.
Thank you.
So thanks, Paul. So you had a couple other items in the chat. Michelle said one is clearly more comfortable taking risks. The other may need more explicit support to do so. Pam wrote one needed more support for approval. The other took the risk to figure it out on his own. And then Rachel, who Paul had mentioned, she shared a little bit leading up to her kind of response to this situation about the importance of us also kind of modeling what we also set for students, right? So she wrote, as educators, many of us have jumped on the bandwagon of growth mindset for our students, but I'm not so sure that a lot of us actually have a growth mindset in place for ourselves. And then she wrote, and Rachel, if you want to chime in after, just to clarify, feel free. She wrote, Teacher 1 found the opportunity for professional growth throughout all of this. Teacher 2 looked at it in a more problem-oriented view. So, and Rachel, feel free if you want to unmute and share. No? Okay. So she said, no, I'm good. So Tracy just added now, how do leaders make sure we move past a culture of nice, maybe by asking for voices from those who disagree and being explicit about seeking disagreement, as opposed to assuming that if nobody says anything, that everybody's on board.
Right. And there's some real great work that comes out of psychological safety. A lot of this work is based on the work of Amy Edmondson, who has really taken the lead. She's got a great book called The Fearless Organization that I'd recommend that people read if you have the time. She's also got some articles, shorter things that you can look at. But she talks about having that intentional disagreement in an organization where you're actually inviting it in. If there's too much agreement around the table, then we may be missing something as far as psychological safety is concerned. So we can prompt that as leaders and actually say, hey, let's maybe explore some other perspectives here before we settle on anything. I think it's really, I'm glad growth mindset got brought up because this is not a personality trait for these two teachers. They're not stuck in the way that they responded. And yes, my take on this would be that Brian has an environment where there's more psychological safety, maybe on his team or in his school organization, maybe even in his district, where there's a level of comfort with making bold choices and really putting that risk out there. But certainly Allison can grow and can heighten the level of psychological safety so that these types of situations where risk is needed are a little bit more comfortable for her. Situations like this, emergencies like this, tend to bring out our reactions in ways. They tend to expose psychological safety or the lack thereof, more so than other situations. And I've had both of these types of teachers that I've worked with as an instructional coach throughout this dilemma. And maybe you have too. Maybe you fall into one of these camps as a teacher.
Jim?
So I want to talk a little bit about some lessons learned from past situations. Here is a picture of some destruction out of Hurricane Katrina, which happened in 2005. You may remember that. There also was an earthquake in Haiti in 2010 that left a lot of destruction in its wake. And the reason why I bring these up is that situations like this and situations like the pandemic that we're in tend to reveal inequities, and people get really worked up about what's happening, and they say we have to have change. And then, time passes and our passion for that fades away. I can think of lots of gun violence that has occurred, and people have had really extreme reactions to that and said, we have to do something, and then time passes and we move on to the next thing. And so I think this is a really great opportunity for us to keep the lessons that we've learned from this pandemic at the forefront as we move forward. It's going to require psychological safety to be able to take the lessons that we've learned and actually enact them. The role of education in situations like this is paramount. So education during emergencies is an essential ingredient. Things like Hurricane Katrina, the earthquake in Haiti, now the coronavirus pandemic. And I know this is a lot of text, but this comes from the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. They have a list of 9 ways that education actually plays a major role in getting us through traumatic situations. For kids, it provides a sense of structure and a sense of normalcy to ease the trauma that is accompanying this. So, I know teachers might be wondering, well, I don't have that many kids who are engaged. But school is providing that sense of structure. It's very important during this time, and it will be important as we move forward. And then again, here's another one of those 9 from UNESCO. Education can provide some essential life-saving messages that kids can actually take the lead in transmitting to their communities, to their parents, to their families. And so education is going to be really important as we move forward from here. What must our new normal be? So a lot of people are wondering, what is education going to be like when we come back? And I am advocating for a new normal that allows us to bounce forward versus bouncing back. So bouncing back implies that we end up where we were, and bouncing forward, which comes from Alison Napolitano, her work, and she talks about ending up in a place that's better than where we started. So that's really what we're looking for here. It's going to require adaptation and flexibility, because none of us have ever done this before. So we've never been in a situation like this. And here is a quote that comes from the Harvard Educational Review, which I shared earlier. We really have to rely upon the experiences and the expertise of the people who are in the situation. So we need to be tapping the ideas of stakeholders like parents and families and community members. Teachers are critically important. Staff members, the people who are in the community. There are lots of state actors and district actors who will have ideas about ways to move things forward. And we need to push back on some of that and really make sure that we're demonstrating psychological safety so that the best can happen for our local communities. Also, it's important to recognize that the inequities that we've seen with this, the inequities that surfaced during Hurricane Katrina and other traumatic events, are due to long histories and systems of power inequity. And so this isn't normal, and it isn't just a natural thing that happens. And it's important to have those bigger discussions as we unpack this situation moving forward, that some of what we've seen is really tied to long, drawn-out histories of power imbalances. And finally, Harvard Educational Review asks, what role should education play in post-disaster contexts? How can we work respectfully and effectively with local communities in the rebuilding efforts? So it's not about doing for other people. It's not about saving anybody. It's really about collaborating and arriving at a better place. So this is what's going to be needed. We're going to need leaders who are inclusive, open, willing to learn, and value integrity. What I mean by leaders is not formal leaders. I mean teacher leaders. I mean educational leaders of all shapes and places. So we need them to be inclusive, bringing in a lot of different voices, open to new ideas, willing to learn new things, and valuing integrity. So being transparent and making sure that the best interests of the community are at the forefront of the decisions that are being made. We need trusting teams ready to make strategic, innovative decisions. I put a asterisk by the word innovative because I'm going to talk about a definition of innovative that is a little bit maybe different than what we typically think of when we talk about innovation in schools. But I do want to emphasize teams because the work of psychological safety actually emerged from teams. Google wanted to study why there were certain teams that were more successful than other teams in their organization, and they found that the more successful teams had higher degrees of psychological safety. So even within an organization like a school or a district that maybe doesn't have high levels of psychological safety, we can make psychological safety a reality at the team level. So it's really important to know what it is and to be able to work on it at whatever level we can influence. We need prioritized decisions. So there are going to be lots of things that we have to decide when we get back, like how we can keep kids safe. We are going to need to decide how to catch kids up who may have missed 2 or more months of school. Those are some short-term things, but we also need to not lose sight of that bigger picture that I was talking about that can fade into the recesses of our minds after the anger goes away and after the passion for the situation goes away. So we want to keep those larger picture ideas and decisions on the table and make sure that we don't lose sight of those. And I put here constructive debate. We had Paul that mentioned that a little bit earlier. It does need to have some semblance of decorum, of course. We don't want to yell at people like Judge Judy or kick people out of meetings. That's not psychological safety. That's not even debate. And we also want deliberate debate, which is what I was talking about a little bit earlier, where we're actually inviting it in. We're asking people to contribute. And then we need opportunities for feedback. We need to ask for feedback. We need to provide feedback. Kim Scott actually wrote a book called Radical Candor, and she talks about feedback as guidance. She thinks that's a softer term. So whether you call it feedback or guidance, we need to be providing that to one another. Kim Scott actually says that we can't care for other people in our organization if we're not willing to give them feedback. That's not very caring. So we need to create opportunities for feedback with some listening loop structures. And I'm telling you that leaders can really do that by actually listening to what people have to contribute and then reporting back how that feedback was enacted or how that feedback was considered. So when people hear that we're willing to accept the feedback and we're willing to act on it, then they're more willing to provide feedback moving forward. So I did promise that I was going to talk about innovation. This comes from a source called Psychological Safety in a Virtual World from an organization called More Than Now. And so if you wanted to find that, it's available online. But innovation is finding something new out of something known. So I'm not asking for people to throw out everything that we've been doing previously. We already have some really wonderful practices. And the whole idea here is to really build on those practices that we already have in place that are working. So innovation, finding something new to grow out of something new. And I really like that definition that comes from Dr. Lee. So our vision for the future, again, this is a lot of text, but I've highlighted some areas that I really want to pay attention to. We want to build back educational systems to be better than before. And again, this comes out of UNESCO. When we have traumatic situations, when we have disasters, we want education to increase educational access, retention, quality, and equity in the bigger picture. So our goal is to make things better, to bounce forward, as we talked about before. So I want you to revisit your psychological safety self-reflection from earlier, and I hope that you aren't going to mark in the I've never heard of it now, but maybe it's moved a little bit further along the line there, and you can define it and even use it in an example. But just maybe do a little bit of a self-reflection here. And then really the rest of the time, I wanted to just entertain your questions, your comments. What questions do you have about psychological safety or how it plays out in schools or anything like that? Psychological safety is also important in the classroom. The reason why I've chosen to emphasize psychological safety at an organizational level is because I think having psychological safety is key to then transmitting it to our kids.
So, Jim, one thing that came up in the chat from Jackie was, she wrote, I would say we can't also forget the generational differences to approaching issues and the gender issues that arise. And so she wrote, do women tend to feel comfortable in their organization taking the same risks or confronting issues that men might? So she also brought into the perspective that everybody's individual context, right, helps to determine where they fit on, I guess, that like gradient of psychological safety for each individual.
Yeah, that is such a good point, Jackie. And actually, in a survey that was conducted from that literature that I shared, Psychological Safety in a Virtual World, they conducted a survey and women actually reported that they felt they would be less psychologically safe in their organizations moving back after the pandemic. So it definitely is going to impact people differently based upon gender, based upon cultural differences, and that's an important thing to recognize. I don't know that I have a lot of answers to that other than it does challenge people differently.
So thanks, Jim. Michelle wrote, she asked a question, pertaining to our return and reentry and some of what you shared. She said, what would you suggest for students, and you could even say for staff, right? Considering that the routines that would bring comfort to all of us in our schools will likely be changed when we return to help in keeping everyone safe.
I think that one of the most important things to sort of filter all of our decisions through as we come back is how do they contribute to the developmental relationships that we have with students. And I think that if we're mindful about that and mindful about the fact that every opportunity that we have to build relationships with our students is key. I think that kids are pretty resilient and they're pretty adaptable, and they'll join us in the journey. We just have to make sure that we're including them. I think having them involved in some of the conversations. Amy Edmondson talks a lot about educational leaders, which of course teachers are, saying to folks, this is the purpose of what we're doing here. And so whenever you have purpose being crystal clear and really well articulated, then that creates a higher level of psychological safety. So I think that's important for us to make sure kids understand, this is why we're doing this. This is why it's important. What do you think? And making sure that they're involved in the discussions, involved in some of the decisions, so that we're maintaining some level of control on their part. I think all of that can help.
So, Jim, I have a question. I think that one of the challenges that any educational leader faces, regardless of their role, is sometimes thinking that the process you're going through is really psychologically safe for the people you work with, whether they're adults, whether they're young learners. and sometimes not recognizing all the pieces that come into play. And so you shared two texts that are on my reading list, right? The book by Amy Edmondson, So Intentional Disagreement, and then the one by Kim Scott, Radical Candor. Are there others that you tend to have as your go-to for helping educators always kind of be seeing their work through this lens? So those are two recommendations. Any others that come to mind?
So the Fearless Organization, Radical Candor, those are actually two texts that I would continue to recommend to people. There's a lot there. There's also been a little bit of writing in the Learning Professional. I think it's Dr. Wanless that wrote an article about psychological safety in education. So there's a little bit of dabbling in education. If you look up some articles in the Learning Professional, there will be some that are discussed there. And it's actually opened up some additional avenues to me. There's some work that is based on inspiration from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Fred Rogers. So there's some pretty sophisticated work that I was turned on to from that article in the Learning Professional. It's called Simple Interactions, and they've got a lot of webinars and podcasts and articles that are great reading about really deepening the relationship, the interactions that we have with kids and other people that can really advance psychological safety. I think that an important thing for leaders to do, if they're not really sure, they might think that they're employing psychological safety, is to conduct some kind of a survey. There are lots of surveys that are out there. The one that I presented, Amy Edmondson has some versions of surveys that you can administer. I also recommend to have a trusted colleague come in and observe at a faculty meeting. If most people are disengaged during a faculty meeting, if the conversations are relatively one way from the leader to the people that are gathered there, if there's not much disagreement, if people are looking at the floor instead of engaging with each other and with the person that's talking, that might be a good indication that psychological safety is something to work on. So you can gain a lot just from having an outside eye in a faculty meeting, watching how people are interacting during that meeting and watching the kinds of responses and participation people are engaging with.
Thanks, Jim. I shared in the text two books that have been really powerful for me have been Difficult Conversations, and thanks for the feedback. Those are both written by Stone and Heen. And I think it's Doug Stone and Sheila Heen. And they're great reads to help, or they were certainly great for me, to help me kind of rethink the processes I use when I ask people for feedback, and to make sure that I'm actually taking the time to understand whether silence might be because there's kind of like a mutual agreement, or whether it's a case where actions I might have taken might be preventing people from voicing their concerns or ideas. So I would say those are two books that delve deeply into how we can monitor ourselves in conversation to help build psychological safety. It's not that psychological safety isn't the point of those books, but the processes around engaging in conversation and providing feedback would lend somebody to getting to a better place and operating with their team.
Thank you so much. I've written those down. I want to check those out.
So other questions for Jim? So Lara wrote, "Thank you, Jim. A different perspective than what I was thinking, and certainly very worthy of the time. Have a great weekend."
Thank you.
So other questions for Jim? You've got a lot of people who are writing great stuff. Thank you. Thanks for the resources. So that's great, Jim.
I do have a copy of my PowerPoint that I can put up on in the chat.
Oh, that would be great.
If I can figure out how to do it.
I think what you can do, Jim, if you stop sharing, right, it'll go back to like the the full screen for you. There you go. And then you might be able to like minimize it to get to your
I can see the
slide
chat.
deck. Yeah. Yep. And then you could paste in the link into the chat box.
Okay, great.
And so as Jim's doing that, what we do with all of these PL on the Go sessions is we archive them. We'll make the video available. And if you were to go to, and while Jim's finding the link, I'm going to go and get the link to where we archive all our PL on the Go sessions. So if you bear with me one moment, we store them on our on the PNW BOCES YouTube page. And I'm going to grab that for you now, just the channel page, so you can access it if you want. All of our PL on the Go sessions are posted there. Okay, so that link that I just put into the chat is where you'll find this video and all of our other sessions. And from there, you can share those out as well. And Jim, were you able to get the link for your presentation?
Yeah, there it is.
Perfect. There it is. Awesome. So feel free to take a look at Jim's presentation. Jim, I'll say that it was, you know, all of these sessions have been great. This was an impactful one for me because I'm always thinking of ways to make sure that I support my team in the best way possible. And so I always like when I have additional text resources that I can go to. So I'm leaving this session not only with some great thinking around psychological safety, but also a couple additional texts, which I'll be adding to my bookshelf.
Thank you so much.
So
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about psychological safety and to, I'm loving learning about this topic, and there's lots of space to be able to apply it to education at this point, because not a lot of people are thinking about it in education. So.
well, thank you, Jim. It was a pleasure to host you. Thank you to everybody here who joined us for our 9 o'clock PL on the Go session. And we wish you a great rest of Friday and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
So thanks, Jim. Appreciate you giving your time. It was a great session.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
So what I'll do, I'm going to get the video converted. I'm going to have it uploaded, and then when it's uploaded, I'll share the link with you for your own records. You know, so you'll have a copy of the, you know, you'll be able to refer back to the session as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
You got it. And looking forward to talking with you soon.
All right. Take care. See
You too.
ya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
You too.